In the late 1960s, the American pop culture machine was a fortress of sun-drenched idealism and acoustic perfection. But lurking in the blind spot of this cultural utopia was a psychological anomaly. A parasite engineered in the darkest corners of the federal prison system. We are conditioned to view him merely as a monster. But before the bloodletting of August 1969, Charles Manson was something far more insidious. An aspiring folk rock musician who spent years weaponizing the frequencies of the human voice. This is the anatomy of a cultural pathogen, how a prison-bred sociopath reverse-engineered the music industry, infiltrated the elite circles of Hollywood, and manipulated courtroom acoustics to orchestrate absolute psychological horror. To decode the anomaly of Charles Manson, we must first examine his laboratory. In 1961, Manson was transferred to McNeil Island Penitentiary, a federal facility in Washington state. He was not a criminal mastermind. He was an undersized, institutionalized drifter who had spent more than half his life bouncing between orphanages, reformatories, and cells. Yet, within the sterile concrete of McNeil Island, Manson initiated a rigorous process of psychological adaptation. He specifically sought out a fellow inmate named Alvin "Creepy" Karpis. Karpis was no ordinary convict. He was a 1930s bank robber, the former leader of the Barker Karpis gang, and the last surviving public enemy #1, apprehended by J. Edgar Hoover. Karpis found Manson lazy, but taking pity on the young man, taught him how to play the guitar. However, Manson was absorbing far more than chord progressions. He was studying the architecture of human influence. In his isolation, Manson voraciously consumed Dale Carnegie's principles to master interpersonal manipulation, cross-referencing them with intensive studies in Scientology. Manson completed over 150 hours of Scientology auditing in prison, internalizing how dogmatic repetition and authoritative commands could override a subject's autonomy. Manson synthesized these methodologies into a bespoke system of behavioral mimicry. He learned to mirror the exact insecurities of anyone he spoke to, crafting a chameleon-like persona. He recognized that if an operator can control a person's acoustic environment, the precise cadence, pitch, and phrasing of the words they hear, they can bypass the target's critical reasoning entirely. Released into the San Francisco Summer of Love in 1967, Manson deployed his newly engineered psychological weaponry. He gathered a flock of vulnerable runaways, utilizing his behavioral mimicry to become whatever they desperately lacked: a father, a guru, a savior. But Manson's ultimate objective was not leading a desert cult. It was penetrating the Hollywood music industry. By 1968, the Anomaly had successfully breached the highest echelons of pop royalty. He targeted Dennis Wilson, the drummer for the Beach Boys. Wilson was utterly captivated by Manson's strange, hypnotic intensity, allowing Manson and his family to move into his Sunset Boulevard mansion. Manson aggressively leveraged Wilson's industry connections to record his own music, ultimately producing a studio album titled Lie, the Love and Terror Cult, tracked partially at the legendary Gold Star Studios, the exact facility used by Phil Spector and the Beach Boys. But Manson's integration into the mainstream fractured over a profound psychological injury. Manson had written a blues-inspired track titled Cease to Exist, designed specifically to exploit the interpersonal tensions between the Wilson brothers. The Beach Boys recorded it, but Dennis Wilson altered the lyrics, renamed it Never Learn Not to Love, and released it as a B-side without crediting Manson, buying his silence with cash and a BSA motorcycle. For a clinical narcissist obsessed with his own messianic voice, the erasure of his lyrics was an unforgivable mutilation of his identity. Simultaneously, Manson set his sights on Terry Melcher, the son of Hollywood icon Doris Day and a powerhouse record producer who had shaped the sound of the Byrds. Manson desperately pursued Melcher for a record contract. Melcher auditioned Manson, witnessed the volatile, parasitic dynamic of his family, and decisively rejected him. Melcher's rejection was the terminal catalyst. It triggered a catastrophic psychological collapse in Manson. Crucially, Terry Melcher had recently vacated a rented house in the hills of Benedict Canyon. The address, was 10,050 Cielo Drive. When the Manson family descended upon Cielo Drive in August 1969, it was not merely a random slaughter. It was a grotesque, retaliatory acoustic performance directed at the Hollywood elite that had silenced his voice. Arrested and brought to trial in 1970, Manson was stripped of his guitars, his studio time, and his commune. But he retained his ultimate weapon. The Los Angeles courtroom became his new acoustic chamber. Physically, Manson was entirely unimposing, standing roughly 5'5" and weighing a mere 140 pounds. Yet, observers and legal professionals noted a terrifying paradox in his physical presence. Manson explicitly understood the physics of his own vocal cords, famously stating in his own words, "My voice can be as big and loud as the largest of men." He delivered his hour-long trial speeches with a bizarre, calculated cadence. He utilized extreme vocal modulation, shifting seamlessly between a high-pitched, obsequious whisper and a booming, resonant roar. He weaponized the physical acoustics of the courtroom, projecting his words to bounce off the walls, intentionally overwhelming the sensory processing of the jury, the judge, and the media. It was an auditory assault, heavily reliant on the Scientology commands and Carnegie influence tactics he had perfected years prior in federal prison. To mask his own failure as an artist, he framed his defense around the Beatles' track, Helter Skelter, falsely claiming the music itself was an apocalyptic frequency, dictating a global race war. He perfectly mirrored the darkest anxieties of a fractured nation, adopting the role of a demonic reflection of the 1960s counterculture. Charles Manson did not possess supernatural powers. He was a terrifyingly acute engineer of human mechanics. A failed folk singer who realized that if society would not broadcast his music, he would force them to broadcast his madness. Until next time, keep your eyes open. You're watching The Anomaly Index.